I generally leave Saturday as a day where I discuss things that are of more value than the typical run of the mill news that we see day to day. And part of the reason for that is because I like to pace myself and have a set number of days to just write things down, jot down notes, make sure I'm speaking in facts or in some opinionated way that is backed by what cannot be denied. Um, I like how people are responding already to the topics, to the title, without actually hearing what I have to say. Um, Let me say hello to VVS and to Winter Fresh. So, when I speak of dark times, I'm not just talking about this relationship drivel, because that's an issue that we've had for millennia, but it's not one that, I'll put it this way, if that were the only problem, there wouldn't be a problem. Even though that does lead to admitted issues in society, but it's still not the focal point of what I would consider the issue of today. You have students being crushed with student loan debt that very much can entrap them for the rest of their lives and having to pay off. You have um, 9/10 of African Americans that are the victim of homicide directly having their deaths the result of someone of their own ethnicity, all the while having members of that same group show out and form demonstrations at the very, in comparison, scant few instances of police brutality in relation to that group. You have people who have become so convinced of these party labels that they will vote for one party over the other in spite of both advocating for many of the same policies or views, Democrat, Republican, and then all the while becoming so upset with the president that they ignore the ills of the politicians at the statewide level and local level. So governors, senators, mayors. You have um, the U.S. In terms of its foreign policy supporting over 70% of the world's dictatorships, in addition to just being hawkish and, again, allowing most commentators to cast a blind eye on whichever um, administration that happens to be their party, even if it does the same thing as the one before it. Let me read what Trips the Kid says. It's not just relationship, it's life in general. Nowhere people are depressed, killing themselves and other people. Right, but I'm trying to, I guess, convey here is that for a very long time, I was distressed by many of the things I stated here um, because I thought, oh, there's nothing I can do. I'm just this one individual. Then I realized a lot of, a big part of the problem for why these things are happening is that there is not a massive number of people who are just informed of this, and that's not their fault. You have the news media being paid out to where they don't discuss certain stories. That's why we're not hearing about net neutrality on Fox or CNN or CBS. And another issue is that you have people who actually have become so convinced by this fake news label that they're going to say, oh, well, of course, CNN and the other places wouldn't talk about this. But if you bash their news source or criticize it for doing the same thing, again, towing the party line. You can't say anything about that place. They're excluded. Um, so that that is a big part of why people are not privy to this. Now, uh, I very much have reflected on these things, thought about it, and come to a couple of conclusions. And one of those is that the people who are most likely to be impacted by a number of these things are not myself. Um, because even if I fall under the area of being bothered by how relationships currently are in the present era, um, I would still be able to escape American imperialism in other countries because I don't live in those countries. Since I'm not in the Middle East, I don't have to worry about my church or hospital getting blown up because they think a terrorist might be 5 miles from there. So I'm able to shield myself from any of those problems. But even the ones that don't impact me, I still feel a sense of this is wrong. Something can be done about this. Um, and it's really amusing that I sit here and mention the real problems with many of these administrations. So you have Democrat, Republican perpetuating the Afghanistan war. And it's almost as if in the daily course of just speaking to people, they're not aware of the similarities that we've seen in these past three or four administrations. You know, you go up to someone down the street, they're not going to be able to tell you about NAFTA or the problems with pulling out of the Paris Agreement or what was okay about the Iran nuclear deal or, you know, how Trump flip-flopped on Cuba or TPP. They're not going to lay out specific things that have proven problematic decade after decade. And if you go after Obama, who's kind of has this shield of immunity, seemingly, where people, even people who want to insult him or are saying something negative about him, have to preface it with, "Okay, this was good, that was good, this was good." So, for example, I would have to, if going on television or some other place that I don't have direct control over, say that, "Oh, I favored Obama's policy in Cuba, and I like the Iran nuke deal, and I favored, you know, being able to start a massive healthcare initiative in the U.S., which was the Affordable Care Act, even if I acknowledge problems with it." But then I would go into his continuing of Bush's surveillance policies with, you know, the Patriot Act, or continuing Bush's drone strikes and Bush's Afghanistan war. This is something I wouldn't be able to get out of California in response to Trips the Kid inquiring. So that's giving you the idea that this little towing of the party line, just, and it's the same thing when I mentioned the as I did in the stream a while back, a short time ago, the murder of African Americans by other African Americans. Because you're of that group, you can't speak about that for some reason. But if you speak about that and you're part of another group, you're insulted for that. You are, you know, people try to find ways to vilify you for talking about something that people would just prefer not to be spoken about. Um, and look, I have no vested interest in making a group look bad, but if that comes at the behest of ignoring a very prevalent issue, I'd rather not do that either. Because whose life does that improve? And you can argue, well, whose life does it improve to talk about it? But I think when you raise awareness of something, you're more likely to not, or there is a higher chance of that person not repeating something they had no idea was as prolific. So, for example, after being told of the similarities between Obama and Bush and Trump, I'm less likely to think that my vote for any of these establishment politicians is going to make a difference. I'm also more likely to say, wait a second, why am I not going after, in terms of critiquing, those on the local level? Oh, I know, it doesn't get any coverage. So I'm going to take the time and go and look up what's the difference between all of them. If they have no difference, I'm going to say there's no difference. Don't vote for any of these people. I don't think you should anyway. And that will be it. Um, but you have so many problems that are just prevalent. And people, when they get on these television stations to try and defend Trump or to try and go against Trump, they're not talking about these things on average. These commentators that you see on the talking box on the wall in your house are not discussing what is so detrimental to the life of those in the U.S. and abroad. You know, I find myself so disturbed by just the complete ignoring of these things. And it's made it to where outlets such as this, and part of what I've tried to do with this channel is give you content that's not readily available by the mainstream. And, you know, that's been to varied results. I know that in the relationship department, that was not typically covered that often. And that was mainly because I'm just a sore loser who didn't like how that was going and just spoke out about it and saw it happening over and over again. And other people, you know, said they also felt this way. And I've kind of chalked up my detractors in every one of these departments to kind of just having a different opinion to have a different opinion. You've had many a times me respond to people who have made implications about me, and you know, I make a couple of points. They tend to dance around those points. So, for example, if I have some user come on there and say, "Oh, well, it's because you speak about it, it's not happening." I mentioned, "Oh, for 3 or 4 years, I was regularly doing stuff and didn't mention this at all," and they'll go, "Oh, well," they won't say anything directly responding to the point I brought up. They'll just flip to another topic. Um, and it's for that reason I've chosen to just not even bother with most of these discussions now. And I don't like that because I always thought that if you talk about something with a person in a way that is cordial, does not call them out of their name, um, even as saying detractor, that's a term that is of validity if the person is opposed to that thing. I'd be called the detractor of NAFTA because I can't stand that agreement. But nonetheless, I've really been disappointed by having to do that. Saberwolf, yeah, they always have an excuse. Most people don't like to admit they're wrong. Well, but one of the consequences of that is that now I don't feel an inclination to even bother talking to that person because they've already made up their mind. And look, it's very scary when someone can make up their mind about something in spite of whatever fact or thing that cannot be disputed comes about. Forget having an opinion. When we talk about, or for example, when I speak about the um, murder of other African Americans by other African Americans, and that it's alarming rate, every day in Chicago, um, you're gonna have people who will say, "What does that have to do with police brutality?" And you'll try to explain to them, "Listen, this is happening much, much more often. Why is this not being talked about?" I'm not saying the other one doesn't matter, but I'd like to see some kind of fanfare shown over these other ones too. Um, People won't respond directly to that. They'll just tell you to stop trying to go to something else. It's never about, well, you know what, that is true, but here's why we do this. It's always an attempt to run to another category. And it's the same thing with the referring to the party line, um, where you had many of these Trump supporters. For example, I knew one Trump supporter. He was he disliked wars. He said he was opposed to the Afghanistan war. Now Trump's kept that war going for since just being in office. Over another year has been added on to the life of what is already the longest American war in history, or war to have the U.S. in history. Um, and I said, you're a Trump supporter, but he's kept this war going. He goes, yeah, but I don't favor an immediate with. Like, no one's talking about immediate withdrawal, which I definitely would love at this point. I mean, 17 years, how much longer he wants to be over there? But nonetheless, they proceeded to toe the party line. And it's been that way multiple times with him in the past where I've actually just kind of said, all right, well, I'm done even bothering to have discussions with you. Because look, it's one thing to say I support this person, but if they keep doing things that are opposed to why you supported them in the first place, why bother? Imagine if one day you turn on the video by mine and say, you know what? I was wrong about talking about any of the things I spoke of before. Let's go out and kill ourselves because, girls didn't like us. And let's go out and uh, vote for Democrats no matter how different they are from whoever else the other person is. Um, if it was just a complete reverse of everything I've spoken about to now, you'd probably stop watching it, dislike the video, unsubscribe, and be done with me. And that's what I would do for most of these politicians that I would have some policy that they have some policy I favor and back them for. If they withdrew from that, go away. But he just wouldn't do it. He just, no matter what Trump did, there was always an excuse. So I was, even with the net neutrality thing, they opposed the guy who did it, but they said, oh no, you should get rid of him. But if you get rid of him, Trump's just going to put someone else there that does the exact same thing. So I just really want those who are checking this out to understand you cannot become so convinced of one thing in spite of facts, and we're not living in a good time. We're not living in a decent time. We are living in a crappy time with very advanced technology that is being misused, misappropriated, and not used at all for things that could have happened or could be. Okay, CX Saberwolf. Okay, no, I already read this thing. Hello, Chris Jones. Uh, Jaxa's slapping his, doing the face palm, and the tribalism sucks. Dirk says never has been. I don't know what that's in direct response to. Uh, but I'm probably gonna get off in a minute or so. I have other things I intend to do. It's just a really sad time. Yeah, we haven't evolved around alongside technology. That's why you have all these murders on Facebook Live. And that's another strange series of coincidences that every time somebody gets killed on Facebook Live, it's a black person. I'm not even making that up. I can make a whole stream about that. But nonetheless, I really want it to be known that I talk about problems with that community because I'm a member of it, or at least of the same ethnicity. And, I believe that the way I want to improve it is different from the way that other people want to do it. And so as a result of considering myself affiliated with that group, I want to advance something in it that you're not seeing from, these protesters and the supposed activists that are showing up now who only get upset about something on television. Get down there. Lord Christ says, I feel like recently you use a lot of anecdotal evidence for your opinion on things. I don't really know what you're talking about. It's not how is it anecdotal evidence to say that 90% of African Americans that are murdered by other African Americans? How is it anecdotal to state the fact that the US supports over 70% of the world's dictatorships? How is it anecdotal to bring up the fact that two presidential candidates from opposing parties shared similar views on multiple issues? Then what are you talking about? Okay, Young Link says it's crazy. A 3-year-old girl was shot in the head in Detroit, calling the crossfire. Two dudes arguing, shaking my head. Yeah, that's another thing that's being ignored. You've had in the last couple of in the last week or so a wide variety of homicides relating to small children that can't even defend themselves, and they're not getting any mainstream coverage. You might see an article on the website, and I might talk about it for a minute or two, but other than that, it's just ignored. I'm talking about people dying over Facebook and stuff. Oh, it's anecdotal evidence for me to bring that up. Do we not remember what happened with Philando Castile? Do we not remember what happened with what was his name? Steve Stevens or whatever last year, the Facebook Live killer as they call him. There was another couple that was the guy was in the driver's seat, the woman was in the passenger seat. There was a baby in the back, and someone came up on them, and she ran out of there. I can pull up those articles. That's not anecdotal. I don't really see what I've said here that is not related to fact. I'm kind of confused. And I didn't say anything about technology being the result of lives being worsened. I said the complete opposite of that. Thanks for letting you know. I don't know who you're talking to, but I don't. I didn't really understand that critique. Anecdotal evidence. The thing with that NAFTA thing was anecdotal, but other than that, not really. If actually it gave a platform for those actions to be seen more. Um, yeah, I agree with that. I was just saying it was kind of strange because I know other people use Facebook Live, but for some reason, every time there was a homicide on, there was always seemingly someone African American. That was bizarre to me. And now I'm not talking about a government conspiracy. I'm trying to figure out why that was. So I'll get off of here, um, and maybe my anecdotal evidence won't bother Lord Chris so much. But I really hope that what's been spoken of And this stream has done something to bring about the fact that there are multiple issues not being spoken about on major channels on YouTube, uh, channels on television, having no protest done whatsoever. And I wanted to stop. I want it to be over. You know, forget not being able to get a woman. You know, let's talk about some things that are going to impact people's lives for the next couple of decades. Ironically enough, it's the fact that there are some men who can get women, the ones that get the one that the in the lower income communities impregnated and have these children that live lives surrounded by people who have no interest in or concern for their life, as I showed a couple of streams ago with those two boyfriends that killed the child of their girlfriends. That actually is part of the problem. So ironically enough, it's what I complained about, which was this, you know, constant rejection thing being reversed, but applied to in the worst kind of way when in consideration with who actually was able to attract them. But that's a story of what we've already talked about. So uh, I was just saying that's the one case where it could still be part of the grander issue. So thank you for watching. I'll have something else out tomorrow. Definitely have a good day.